Looking Forward Our Way podcast addresses today's critical issues affecting those 50 and over in Ohio. We focus on issues that affect our money and our neighborhoods. Our expert guests are here to provide the information and resources needed to address these challenges. We are looking forward our way. Hi, this is Brett. Each year, we include a podcast on the issues of voting in our community. This year, it's critical to understand the process and to exercise our right and responsibility to vote. We're honored to have Jen Miller, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Ohio, as our expert guest. Jen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We are so glad to see you, and we know how busy your schedule is right now, but we really thought this was an important year to get information from the League and find out more about you and what's going on. But before we actually jump into information about the League, let's hear a little bit more about you and what brought you to the League.
So I'm a proud daughter of Ohio. I grew up in North Central Ohio, and my parents were business owners. My grandparents worked in agriculture and small business, and I love Ohio. And I think my parents and grandparents were civic leaders, but really in a nonpartisan way, right? Because they had a business. And so I've always really cared about systems and politics and how we can promote a better Ohio, but I've never really seen that through the party lens. And so the League is a perfect fit for me since our North Star are voters.
And it's really where the difficulty that so many voters have today is what they're hearing is only from a party perspective, and they're not really hearing that what's important for you and what's going to be the best plan for you information.
Yeah, absolutely. So the League has a 104-year history. And in that, we've never taken stances on parties. We've never supported or opposed candidates. We are fiercely nonpartisan. And there's a lot of aspects of Ohio's election system that we help secure. Things that we now take for granted, but that we help secure. So election administration plans, which is when boards of elections plan and make public how they're going to handle turnout, post-election audits, absentee voting, or sometimes people call it voting by mail, the bipartisan oversight of polling locations and the entire Board of Election system, fairness in balloting, testing and certification of voting machines, youth at the booth, which is where 17-year-olds can work as poll workers and get paid and skip school.
Right. And skip school. There you go.
So there's a lot of aspects of voting that we have worked on. And I love that history because it shows how much we care about voters and really the election system itself. We want it to work for voters.
You know, what I love about the League of Women Voters is the name. One of the things that I am always I told my students and I tell my young cousins is that, women just recently got the right to vote. My grandmother would not have been able to vote most of her life. So hearing that it's called the League of Women Voters, that makes it really special. So I just want to thank you and all of your team for everything that they do.
Well, let me jump in there because our predecessor was the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association. Right. So we've transformed into the League as we expected women to get the right to vote. The Women's Suffrage Association had tried multiple times through ballot initiatives to get women the right to vote here in Ohio, unsuccessfully. And so the only victory we had was in the 1890s where women were able to vote for school board, but not any other race on the ballot. And so what that meant for us was as women were getting the right to vote, we wanted to make sure that they understood the logistics of voting. And this was really to teach women, by women, all the wheres, the hows, the whats, the logistics. But and we're going to keep the name, the League of Women Voters, and we are primarily a women's organization. But I should mention that we have members and leaders of all genders, and we want everyone to join, even if they are not a woman themselves.
Well, that, we've talked about, and we all know there's a ton of misinformation on it. national, local, state level, that sort of thing. It's just prevalent everywhere. And the League of Women Voters is a national organization, as you mentioned, that promotes the voting, that promotes voting, I should say, but in an unbiased, complete information, resource driven sort of thing. So I got a couple of layers in regards to how you approach this. So it's a national organization, but how do you, as a Ohio chapter, I guess you would call it, or Ohio organization, make it work here in Ohio as being a national organization? Some history, goals, successes, at least on an Ohio level.
So all those things I pointed out at the beginning were actually Ohio victories.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And so a lot of those things the national organization championed as well. But when you are a member of the league, you are a member of the local league, the state league, and the national league. Okay. And what makes us strong, I think, in a lot of ways, is that at the national level, they have the benefit of knowing voters' experiences and what's happening at the policy level in Ohio and at the local level, and vice versa. And so one of the things that's powerful about this is that we have very real knowledge, not just of what's happening on the ground locally or what's happening in the state house, but what's happening across the country and in DC. And that makes us incredibly strong. One thing I want to point out is that the Ohio League has always been one of the strongest state leagues in the country. Even the second president of the National League came from Ohio. Our nonpartisan status was insisted on by Belle Sherwin from Cleveland. Our voter guide, which we're known for, started in Cleveland in the 1920s. And our voter guide now is online, vote411.org. And that is a tool that is managed and used at all three levels. So you can use that anywhere. One thing I will mention is that at the local level, we are run by volunteers. At the state level, we use a lot of volunteers, but at the local level, we're almost entirely volunteer run. So we need members from across the state of Ohio who are going to join, and maybe they'll help put on candidate forums. Or if you still have print voter guides in your community, those are done by volunteers. Vote411.org is the online presence where the three organizations can collaborate the best. But volunteer power is still key to what we do at League.
One of the key concerns I have is that voters don't see themselves as having an important role in the process. I realize that we need to have protections to make sure that individuals remain eligible, and that we shouldn't emphasize keeping people connected to the voting process. Instead, what seems to be happening is we're pushing them away. What you hear on the news is all the time, the Secretary of State has taken 100,000 people off the voter rolls. How do we keep people engaged and realizing the importance of their role as a voter?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to talk about the fact that if you're an infrequent voter, you can, after 6 years, you can be removed from the rolls. But also, additionally, a lot of times people move or they change their name and they forget to update their registration. Mm-hmm. So a best practice is to always check your registration before the voter registration deadline to make sure it's up to date. So when we think about a voting plan, even for our most consistent voters, we say it starts by checking your registration and making sure it's up to date.
And, in that vein, too, of being consistent with your voting, it seems like we should be encouraging potential voters as well, we should be encouraging it all the time, not to vote all the time, but that it should be a constant conversation, instead of waiting for the next election cycle when we simply put some social media and registration deadlines, that sort of thing. What do you think we could do to convince individuals to commit to voting? I mean, start with school-age children, or maybe start at the high school, as we get closer to that eligibility time, that sort of thing. When should we start, and how do we carry it on?
So I think one thing that's a little more philosophical, but I think as a culture, we are democratic. Think about at a time when maybe your family voted on where you're going to go on vacation, or the classroom voted on whether they wanted pizza or ice cream for their big end of the year party. We are culturally, we are a democracy. And so I think that we just need to remind folks that voting is who we are, and that every election matters and every race matters. One of the things I worry about is that some folks will only show up to vote for the presidential election, right? But these local races, these local candidates, especially if you think about judges, can affect our daily lives. And I think it comes down to demystifying the ways that government works and the way that those who represent us, what their jobs are. And we start that, of course, in school. You know, we have a program called Voter Girl with the Girl Scouts. We have volunteers who go into high school classes and teach basic civics and register those who are old enough to vote, but give pledge to vote cards for those who aren't. As a QR code, they can put their information in, and we will send them information on how to register once they turn 18. This year, we took an Airstream to 20 college campuses just to get students excited. We got them registered, but a lot of times we're also just demystifying the various voting processes and answering questions and trying to build a culture of excitement around voting. But I also think that voting is step one. It's not the last step. The next step is, how do we help everyday Ohioans know who to contact when there's an issue that's impacting them? How do we help them find their city council member or their state rep or their congressperson? And that's another thing that we love to do at League, is just to demystify that process so that people can be heard throughout the entire calendar year, even if an election isn't happening right at that minute.
Yeah. You know, there are always pros and cons to everything. And for as political as the last 4 to 6 to 8 years has been in regards to just the blow up of everything, it does seem that more people are involved. They have a bit more consciousness of the process, and again, it's tinted with anger. I understand that, but it's that we kind of know that, oh, this can happen. Oh, didn't know that happened then, that sort of thing. I think we're being educated on the fly to a certain degree. Good or bad. Again, it's both a yin and a yang to this, but it's maybe there's a bit more, at least, acknowledgement of the process, and maybe more comfortable. But you're right. It's that, okay, I have a problem. Who do I go to? That education piece to it is one step into, oh, this is what government can do or can't do, now I'm part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a new card that we just experimented with in the field this year. And it's called Your Voice, Your Power card. And instead of saying who the candidates are, it says kind of what their jobs are. Because I think if we know what the candidate's job is, we might have a better chance of deciding who's most qualified for it. And also, then, when you're seeing something in your community that you would like to be different, you know who might be the best to contact in terms of your elected officials. And I think we need to just continue to do more of that.
Yeah, well, we could make or have a little laugh at it. We interviewed the county auditor a while back, and we Carol did some digging in regards to what that office does, and apparently he missed a lot of meetings because he does a lot of things he didn't realize that office is supposed to do. It was so funny to kind of go, you do that? The auditor office does that? He says, yeah, we do.
And he said when the decisions were made, the auditor must not have been in the room. So
exactly.
Whoever didn't want to do something, they just pushed it into the auditor's bailiwick, because he's all over the place. Mike Stenziano, we'll give a shout out to Mike. But I love this point of what you're saying. It is so true that we keep saying, this person isn't qualified. This person isn't qualified. But the person we think may be qualified because we like them, we like their party, they may not be qualified either when you really look at the job description. That is an incredible insight. Thank you for that.
And the reason why we experimented with it was really because we have this Airstream going to college campuses. And what we know about college students and young voters is that they care about the world. They just don't always connect voting with the issues they care about. And so to the extent that we can talk about what, the executive branch does versus the legislative branch, or what county prosecutor does versus Congress, these things can matter a lot, I think, to young people. So it was an experiment, and I think we're going to continue to mess with that.
Oh,
Good.
absolutely.
have
That
a-
sounds great.
I was just going to mention, we also have a textbook that we started in 1964, believe it or not, called Know Your Ohio Government. And it is available for free online through a partnership with WOSU in both English and Spanish. It's plain language. Hopefully we'll win on Citizens Not Politicians, and we'll have to update it in terms of what the redistricting process is. But it's another tool for just trying to help folks understand how government works. A lot of our local leagues have something similar about their county level government.
Well,
Again, made by volunteers.
Our frustration with government is often because we don't see things being fixed. But if we're asking the wrong person to fix it, because that's not in their bailiwick, then they're frustrated, we're frustrated, and nothing gets done. Where if we had a better understanding, and I have to qualify by saying, I did an internship in Congress. I worked for the state of Ohio at one point in time. And when people say to me, well, they just don't do this, they don't, and I'm like, you need to go and work for government and to see how to make things happen, because it will happen. Things will happen if we've got the right people in the right spot doing the right things. We sort of touched on this, and that is that voting is a complex system. There's so many people on the issues, on the ballots, so many people, so many issues on the ballots. Becoming an educated voter is really hard. How does the league promote resources to help individuals learn about the issues and about the candidates, as opposed to just being dependent on their sample ballot they get from their party office?
Well, we promote two kinds of education. So the first is really the logistics of voting, and I hope we'll get into that at some point. But the second is how to research those who are on your ballot and the issues that are on your ballot. And again, I would say vote411.org is an incredible resource. Online is kind of like a social media tool where every candidate gets their own login and they answer the questions directly themselves. They upload their picture. Even if they called me and said, Jen, I have a grammatical error, can you just fix that real quick? I can't do it. The idea is to be the conduit between candidate and voter. Unfortunately, we do see that fewer and fewer candidates are responding to these questionnaires, not even just through the league, but across the board, and fewer candidates are doing forums. But we also run forums at the local level. We don't do debates where you get time to rebut, but we ask the same or similar questions to candidates. Sometimes those forums are even more of a speed dating setup, which I really appreciate, where candidates are at different tables and voters can go to different tables, ask questions of their candidates, and then keep circling around. Why? Because our hope is to simply be that conduit where voters and candidates can connect. But I certainly encourage everyone also to watch the sources they're using. Both mis and disinformation are on the rise. So misinformation is when we're just a little bit confused and we share wrong information. Disinformation is when someone is purposefully putting bad information out there. Bad actors are trying to confuse us or sow discord. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that. But I think most importantly, let's have a well-balanced media diet. Let's not get all of our information from one source. If we're getting stuff online, let's look at those websites. Is that a real website? For example, if it looks like it's a government website, does it say .gov at the end? Those kinds of things to really ask ourselves questions. Similarly, sure, watch Fox News, but maybe also watch MSNBC, right? Or watch CNN, but maybe also listen to NPR. All of these things are about trying to have a more complete media diet so that we aren't just in our own echo chambers, and it can help us kind of see through both mis and disinformation. But at the end of the day, if you have a question, you should ask. So especially if it's something about the voting process that you think might not be right, we want you to call the league or your board of elections so that you don't miss out on the process.
Yeah, I do have to say that the Q&A that you do the forums and print and put in print. My wife and I look at that, and we've made decisions based on answers that candidates just. And it's not that they didn't answer the question, but they just didn't take the question seriously. They didn't answer it. They're kind of dancing around. It's like, okay, you can't answer this simple question. What are you going to do in office? And the more that they answer, the better they answer. In regards to detail, what you ask them, it's not like you're asking terrible questions. It's pretty much what your job is going to be. That's just like you said. It amazes me those that don't answer and it's blank, or number two, that just don't answer the question at all. And it's just it to me in my mind going, can you not answer a question? Do you not have the capacity to do this sort of thing? It's like, this doesn't look good. And it can't take that long to do for them. Just do it. Answer the question. Come on.
And they probably have a platform on all those issues that we ask about. They have a platform.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too hard to pull from that platform to answer.
Right. And a forum is going to give you a whole different perspective on their answer than what you see on advertising on television. I mean, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of misinformation or disinformation floating past us every day.
Well, and I think this is, and I know we're going to get to gerrymandering, but this is one of the reasons why gerrymandering, we have to fight it. Because when lawmakers, especially lawmakers, when they know they can win their seat over and over again just by winning the primary, they don't go outside of their comfort zone to do candidate forums or to answer questionnaires. And that's a problem. And so when we have more legislative seats that sway back and forth based on public opinion, because they were drawn fairly rather than to secure an advantage for one candidate over another candidate, we have more responsive candidates on the campaign trail.
Right.
They also then become more responsive lawmakers once they're in office.
Right. Exactly.
So, in the past, Ohio's been known for its well-run, fair elections process. It's a little bit in question now. I mean, legislatures are making last-minute changes on the heels of early voting. Elected officials promote misinformation, as you stated, and some distrust to justify their actions. I like what you talked about earlier of putting the power in the voters' hands. So what should we expect? What should we do? What should we demand as a voter to start cleaning this up? What can we do, outside of voting somebody in or out? I mean, and that may be the answer. Maybe it is, but it's that it just seems like everything's out of our power and it's just happening around. It's like, okay, this is it. This is what I got, sort of thing. What should we be demanding? Yeah.
So first off, let's think about, again, whose job it is, right? So at the state level, it's the Secretary of State. Right now, that's Secretary LaRose. He is the chief elections officer. All 88 boards of elections get their directions on how to operate elections from him. The legislature makes a lot of laws about voting, but they're also listening to his feedback. Maybe not always agreeing, but they at least listen to his feedback. So if you're worried about how elections work, I would say look at the state legislature and look at the Secretary of State. And know that there are watchdogs like myself who are in those hearings or having meetings with these folks about what voters need. And if something's happening on the ground where you are, I want to know that, right? Like, we pride ourselves in being the experts on how voters interact with electoral systems. But that only works if voters are telling us what's going on, right? So when you have a problem or you have a concern, join the league or call us. We also work with the Nonpartisan Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE, which is the largest, that's OURVOTE. It's the largest nonpartisan national hotline. League, NAACP, Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, all these different groups are on that. That's one piece. Come to hearings, send emails. Also remember that our elections officials are our neighbors and they're hardworking people, and they have boards of elections meetings. You can go there And our members are often there at those boards of elections, but we could use some more volunteers to hit more counties. We hit well over 40, but not all 88. So that you can kind of hear what's going on in the ground or the kinds of things they need. Be a poll worker. At the end of the day, poll workers are the backbone of how our elections run. And they're long hours. Our poll workers skew older and which is awesome because they have a lot of experience and know-how, but sometimes they need young ones just to lift up the heavy box or things like that,
Sure.
and so it's a great opportunity to see elections up front and if you ever have any concerns about election security, you will see all of the detailed safeguards that are built into every part of the process. So those are just a few ideas.
Jen,
Yeah.
I want to get a specific question out here about this. You just mentioned about contacting, watch the legislators, Secretary of State's office, and contacting them if you have a concern, contacting offices like yours. I have tried to contact some of these offices, and particularly at the U.S. congressional level, these folks have cut off contacts. So we have a particular congressman in Ohio who does a really good job of being on his bully pulpit, talking about all of his issues and all of his wants and his beliefs. But he refuses to take even an email from somebody who lives outside his district. They cut you off. They won't even let you in.
Well, I do get it. I mean, I do feel as though, in a way, every Congress member should care about the experience of Ohioans, even if it's outside of their district lines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But before we even get there, they need to care about the experiences of the voters within their district lines. And I'm worried that they don't do that. And that's where the concept of gerrymandering comes in, which is that Ohio is one of the most gerrymandered in the country. And it's when politicians are able to rig those lines so that they and their friends know that they're going to win over and over again. So what happens? As long as you win the primary, you win the general election. So you're playing to a very small minority of voters who show up in that district voting in that primary. So they play to party extremes and they play to big pocketed donors. And so at the end of the day, they're not going to go out on a limb to do something that their most extreme voters who vote in the primary or their donors who fundraise, who fund their campaigns, they're not going to go out on a limb past those folks. And so if we want to have responsive lawmakers, step one is we need to have fair lines. And I know we're going to talk about citizens, not politicians, but what I would say to folks who live in a congressional district, that doesn't mean to give up. You should still raise your voice on the issue that matters. And one of the things that's most effective, actually, is going to that congressional district office. And they really take note when someone shows up to a congressional district office and shares their concerns. But ultimately, we won't see a responsiveness of lawmakers until we see maps that are fair.
You had mentioned that the league members tended to be either older or younger, which I think is phenomenal because it gives younger folks excitement and energy and older folks the opportunity to be good mentors. I was very lucky that my parents were absolutely committed to voting. The first year I was old enough to vote in the presidential election, I was at school at Otterbein. My dad picked me up, took me back home to the voting booth, and then brought me back to campus so that I could vote in my first presidential election. And when I voted in that year, there had only been, I think it was 10 or maybe 11 presidents that had actually received the female vote when I became old enough to vote. When my mother turned 18, there had only been 4 presidents that had received votes from women. So I guess it's still in my head how important it is. You have a vote, you use that vote because it's so easy not to have that vote. You had mentioned one program called Voter Girl 2024, which is at my favorite place, the new STEM program at the Girl Scout Camp Conjockety. What are the ways that we can get our young people involved, particularly college students, but also younger kids too? But how do we make sure they have voting access and keep them going to the voting booth?
So in 2018, we actually did some focus groups with young voters, so 25 and under. And even though a lot has changed, all the research kind of still holds up what we found in those focus groups, which is that you can hold everything constant, age, income level, education level, race, gender, military status. You can hold all those things constant. And the one difference as to whether a young person is a regular voter or not is if someone invested, like your dad, driving you down, getting you to the voting booth, and then getting you back. And you're a lifelong voter.
Right.
You'd be surprised. I mean, we had kids who are on full rides to Denison who didn't realize you had to register to vote until it was too late, right? So the most transformative thing we need to start with is just check on the young ones in your life. Make sure they know the ropes of voting because there's a lot of details. And we don't want them to just get stuck on something because sometimes, one of the young people said to me, yeah, so I got off the bus. I went into the right polling location. I didn't realize I didn't have my ID. They said I was going to have to do this provisional thing. I thought that was BS and I left. So they didn't, if they would have known that they needed an ID, and if they would have known, just cast that provisional ballot and then go back and bring your ID, either one of those moments could have been an intervention because then the next thing they said was, and I haven't tried since, and so I think first and foremost, we need to check in on all of our loved ones about the voting plans, especially because voting has changed a lot. There's a lot of new rules and regulations since the last presidential election. And so we need to revisit our voting plan every year, and we need to help others do so. Step one, make sure your registration is right. Step two, if you're voting on election day, check your polling locations because they move. Right?
Right. Absolutely.
If you're voting early or you're voting on election day, check the hours, check the address, make sure you have the proper ID, right? Which is very specific now. We now have one of the strictest voter ID requirements in the country. So let's go through that real quick. So that is you have to have an Ohio BMV issued driver's license or state ID. What's new, and I'm proud because our members actually got this added when this was getting passed. It's not perfect, but now for the first time, passport, book, or card counts. Active duty military cards work, and U.S. veteran IDs count. I think for your listeners, what's important to highlight here is that county veteran IDs no longer count. And that was one of the most primary, veterans often would use their county issued veteran ID. That no longer counts. They have to use the one from the U.S. Veteran Affairs, which, by the way, is only digital. So that's the only digital ID that is accepted at the polling location. I have heard lawmakers talk about how they were going to fix that, and it just hasn't happened yet. And I hope someday it does happen. When this was called 458 and it was passed in a lame duck, and when it was passing, interestingly enough, I had 140 of my volunteers down in Columbus for something we called Lobby Day or State House Day. And we knew it was going to pass. And so we went in and we said, look, if I can fly to a war-torn country with my passport, I should be able to vote with it. And so we were trying to nibble around the edges. At that time, my understanding was that county ID was like county veterans IDs were counted. But what I would say is this is another thing. Like, hey, come join the league. If you're a veteran, please come join the league and help us explain to lawmakers why a county veteran ID should count. So one piece of disinformation that is out there or misinformation that's out there is you just need that ID of all those that count. It just needs to be unexpired. It does not have to have a current address.
Oh.
So that is one piece. So like passports, books, and cards don't have an address at all. Your driver's license, you may move, right? It doesn't matter if the address is correct. It just needs to be the name needs to be as it is on the rolls or very close to it. And it needs to be Ohio issued ID from the BMV, unexpired passport, obviously from U.S. government, military from that branch, or U.S. veteran ID.
Let's go back to poll workers. To me, I'm amazed. I didn't realize up until the last few cycles. I have friends that volunteer, that day, and just how much goes into it. And it's a long, long day, but they love it. They every year they're doing it. But recently, we're dealing with threats, or at least we now know that poll workers are feeling threats. Maybe it was happened before, I don't know, but now it's being known. Do we need to put more resources into the election process, ensuring that not only the safety of the workers is there, but also maybe the safety of the infrastructure and the IT systems? How does the League of Women Voters see that part of it as well?
Okay, so of course, it would be great to have more resources, financial resources for boards of elections would be great. They will put it to good use, whether it's new machines or new software or more staff or better ADA compliance, whatever it is. So of course, we support funding for boards of elections from the county level, state level, or federal level. In terms of security of our elections, actually, our elections are incredibly secure and trustworthy. And step one is making sure that we all remember that we remember that elections officials and poll workers are our neighbors, they are community servants, that every board of elections and every polling location is run by equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats, that nothing is done without oversight of two. So for example, the machines are stored in a room that has a Republican key and a Democratic key, right? The tally system takes a Republican login and a Democratic login. The drop box has to be emptied by one Republican, one Democrat. There's security throughout the process. And I think if we want to bring the temperature down, we have to fill any sort of vacuum in terms of what people understand about elections. We have to fill that vacuum with good information. In terms of poll workers, we haven't seen threats to poll workers themselves here in Ohio, though the temperature and rhetoric around elections in general is nasty in a way that it hasn't been before. One of the things we do is when we get calls, especially into our hotline, 866 our vote, OURVOTE, that's about kind of ill-behaved humans outside of polling locations or early vote centers. We dispatch what are called peacekeepers. And these are all volunteers. They are faith leaders, social workers, lawyers, and others who are trained in de-escalation. And the idea being to just bring the temperature down. And that seems to help a lot. But there's so many other ways, right, to bring the temperature down. One of the things we do right now is in a week or two, we will do a program on how elections are secure for the public. And I'll make sure y'all know about it. And then we're going to encourage everyone to write a letter to the editor thanking their boards of elections and their poll workers. Because it's harder to distrust the system when you realize that these folks are our neighbors, right? They're community members, and they're equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats running our election system. I mean, another tip for any of your listeners who have language proficiency, when they sign up to be a poll worker, they could ask the Board of Elections if there are certain polling locations where voters who speak that language are more likely to go. Because I think that can be particularly helpful.
Sure.
And just a very cool form of service. We have a lot of our citizens who pass the citizenship test, which means they have reading ability, but they might still feel more comfortable communicating and have a better understanding in their mother tongue. And so if someone is fluent in Arabic or Spanish, or even just conversationally capable, they could offer that to their Board of Elections when they call to be a poll worker.
So if you're a voter that has that need for translation or just help with the English language, put it that way, how does a voter go up and ask for that?
Well, any voter can ask for help.
Okay. They just go up and say, do you have somebody that can help me, or however they can say it? Yeah, that sort of thing. Okay.
Any voter can ask for help. Okay. And there's two things you can do. One is you can ask someone to come into the voting booth that you trust, or maybe you want to get an absentee ballot at your home so that you can fill it out, and if there's someone there can help you read it, better, just to make sure you understand it. Those things are fine. But any voter can ask for help from workers.
Can you bring somebody with you to help you?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
good to know.
The only folks you can't bring to help you into the booth are if they are your employer, an agent of your union, or a candidate on your ballot. Those folks you shouldn't bring in. But otherwise, you can bring in any helper you want.
And does the helper then need to bring an ID?
They shouldn't.
Okay.
If they get asked for ID, then they should call 866-HOUR-VOTE.
Okay.
They're not voting. They're just voting. So you can think about maybe grandma wants to still vote in person, but her eyes are failing and she's just a little bit nervous about seeing everything, or someone's doing it for the first time, and they're nervous, and so they want mom to come with them. They are allowed to ask for the helper of their choice, or you can even ask for a Republican and Democrat poll worker to sit with you at your machine to assist you at the same time.
Jen, we want to make sure that our audience knows all of the ins and outs of the logistics of voting. So why don't you give us a little overview of that?
So one thing you can do is you can Google "Make a Voting Plan, League of Women Voters of Ohio," and some information will pop up. You can also, if you have questions, you can go to voteohio.gov, which is the site for the Secretary of State, or you can call or go to the website of your Board of Elections. But what I'll say is let's talk through the different ways. If you're early voting at your one county early vote center, you now need a photo ID. In the past, you could use the last four of your social when you went to vote in person at the early vote center. You now need one of those IDs we already talked about. The other thing is the hours change weekly, and that last week of early vote, they change almost daily. So before you leave your house, check and make sure the early vote center is open. Okay. If you're voting absentee or by mail, the number one thing to do is not to delay on any piece of the process. So voting by mail is incredibly secure. You have to prove your identity twice. It's the only way of voting. You have to prove your identity twice. First to request your ballot, and then to have your ballot count. And so, but requesting your ballot is something that you cannot do online. You can get the form online, but you have to print it out, fill it in, and get it to your Board of Elections. Also libraries, of course, the Board of Elections. There can be other places that have the absentee ballot request form. But especially if you're going to use the mail system to mail it back, you're going to add some days there, right? Then they're going to mail the ballot to you. That's going to add some days. And then you have to return it. So there's some tips here that can help. The first is follow the instructions on the absentee ballot request form completely. Make sure you fill out the entire thing. There's stuff highlighted in yellow. That's all required. What's not highlighted in yellow, but is recommended, is that you fill in your email address and phone number. Why? Because if they have a problem or question about your application and all they have is your mailing address, they have to mail that to you rather than picking up the phone or emailing you, which is much more efficient to get that fixed. Do not delay. Do that immediately. If you plan on doing that, do that today. Okay, because you just the thing about the absentee process is it's incredibly convenient, but it does take longer. So don't delay on it. The next thing, when you get your ballot, make sure you read all of the instructions. Okay, it'll tell you how many stamps you need. Don't listen to some meme on the website, because you can live in the same county with someone else and have a different length of ballot, and they might not give you the right stamps numbers, right? It'll tell you how many stamps you need. It'll tell you where you need to sign. It'll tell you what envelope does what, right? It'll tell you all those things. Follow all of those instructions. And then again, don't delay in returning it. If you're going to put it in the mail, walk it into your post office. Why? Because not every piece of mail is postmarked.
Right.
And if it comes after Election Day, there's a time where there's a few days after Election Day that ballots can still come in and be counted as long as they're postmarked in time. Okay. So you need to walk it into your post office and say, please postmark this, right? Or get it to the county drop box. Remember that there's a new rule now that if you are returning the ballot for someone else, you can't use that 24/7 drop box. You actually have to walk into the Board of Elections when it's open and fill out some paperwork. And so all aspects of this take time. And finally, if you go to voteohio.gov, you can actually track your absentee ballot. And I find that particularly helpful because it'll help you know. I mean, the boards of elections are processing a lot of stuff. So it'll help you know, did they get your request? Did they approve your request? Is it in the mail to you? All of those things. So that's a surefire way to make that work. If you're voting on election day, make sure you check your polling location because it changes. Again, make sure you have your proper ID. If you're voting in person and you vote provisionally, that can happen at the early vote center or on election day. You may get instructions from the poll worker. Don't throw those away. Read them because that will help you know how to make sure your ballot counts. There are different reasons to get a provisional ballot. Sometimes it's you just didn't bring the right ID and you'll have to go back to the Board of Elections. You only have a few days to do it. Go back to the Board of Elections and provide your proper ID. Sometimes it's something like you requested an absentee ballot. Maybe it didn't come. So now you're going to vote in person. You're going to get a provisional ballot so that you as a voter only cast one ballot, only one ballot counts. And so if you get a provisional ballot, the answer is not to not vote. The answer is to find out why you're getting it and then do whatever you need to do to make sure it counts. Hopefully that helps a little bit. But the bottom line is just remember that boards of elections have a lot of rules because this is about safety and security. And so there's safeguards built throughout the entire process. But they want to help you vote. And so call them or call the league or call our hotline 866-OUR-VOTE. And we will help you get through the process and the problems that you're having.
I did absentee ballots in Delaware County for many years, and I have to give a shout out to the folks at the Board of Elections in our county. They have done a phenomenal job and are always incredibly helpful and go out of their way. So if people are concerned about the security of the system, then don't complain about all the rules. The rules are there to make it secure. But also there are lots and lots of people who really do want to help you vote. So just hang in there, stick with it, follow the information, and you're good to go. So Jen, let's go ahead and then just jump right into issue 1. Now, it just happened that I had already prepared our list of questions, and then the league came out with a phenomenal report called Ohio's Congressional Districts, Disparities, Division, and Disadvantages. So I changed my question a little bit. It's still, bottom line is, the group Citizens Not Politicians brought gerrymandering to the voters and collected over 700,000 signatures from every county in Ohio, which I think was twice the number they had to have. It's on the ballot as issue 1. There have been incredible escapades happening to convince people to vote no on issue 1. We want to hear from the league. What is issue 1? Why is it there? Why is it important that we vote yes?
All right, so let's walk through a couple things. So first off, I just want to mention that we had, along with our friends at Common Cause, 3,000 volunteers in the field collecting signatures.
Go,
and,
yes.
More like at least a quarter of those that we turned in to the Secretary of State were from volunteers. And so I'm very, very proud of that. Another thing I want to mention about our history, because I think our history speaks for itself, and I think it helps inoculate against some of the disinformation. The first time the league actually in Ohio had a ballot issue to end gerrymandering was in 1981, and it was endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party and opposed by the Ohio Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because whatever party is in control wants to keep the system as is.
Right.
And so what we know to be true is that both parties do this, right? It's only human nature that if you're part of the political infrastructure of a party, if you're an elected official and you have any influence over drawing district lines, you want to use that influence to make sure you and your friends get elected over and over again. And so the league also has been in lawsuits where we have litigated against maps or districts that have been rigged for Democrats as well as rigged for Republicans. Our North Star are voters. And I am proud to say that we helped write this language. I'm proud to say that our volunteers are the ones that got it through the AG process, which is the first part. And that is because this truly does end gerrymandering, which is rigging maps so that your party wins over and over again. Gerrymandering hurts every voter in the state of Ohio. We already talked about this. If you know you're going to win your seat over and over again, you don't have to listen to the people that you represent. And in fact, what we see, and I've seen this in the state house for over 20 years now, that when a state is so extremely gerrymandered like Ohio, and Ohio is one of the worst in the country, a lawmaker who crosses the aisle to work on a common sense policy solution almost always loses their primary.
Right.
So gerrymandering is fueling extremes. It is breaking down any ability to have common sense bipartisan solutions to the issues that affect us. The Ohio State House and Congress affect every aspect of our daily lives. And so that's why issue 1, citizens, not politicians, the solution is in the name. If politicians are always going to politician, if they're always going to rig the maps for their favor, let us take them out of the equation. And so citizens, not politicians, bans politicians, lobbyists, party leaders, and their spouses, all of whom have a personal interest in being able to draw these lines. The next thing that I think is super important is never in our history in Ohio have we had a balanced commission. So as we talk about the party balance of boards of elections, which is one of the things that I think makes our elections so secure, we've never had party balance in how we draw maps. So right now, the redistricting commission is 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The way that the governor's race goes is the way the rest of the statewide races go. 3 of those commissioners are statewide races, right? So it could flip the other way. At some point, you could have a Democrat, 3 statewide Democrats, and so then you have 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans. This is not helpful, right?
Right.
And citizens, not politicians, is 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 5 independents. And I particularly love the 5 independents because we've never had a voice for independence in the redistricting process. And more Ohioans consider themselves independent than member of either party. So
Right.
the third and most important thing, and I think this is also as important as the other 2, is that nothing will be done behind closed doors. The maps that we are living under right now, not only have they been struck down 7 times by the Ohio Supreme Court, they were all made behind closed doors. And I can tell you, because I watched them be made behind closed doors, which might not make sense, but there is a room right off the hearing room, and commissioners were circling around. They could only have so many commissioners in the room at the same time without, breaking kind of open meeting laws. And you could even question as to whether they did or not. And so you'd have one in there and one would circle in and then another would circle in. And they kept doing this round robin concept. And the media and nonpartisan groups like myself are sitting there waiting for the hearings to start, sitting there waiting to have the conversations about what these maps look like. They were made behind closed doors. So finally, we will also have a commission that every aspect of the process will have to be done in the public view. So ban politicians, lobbyists, and party leaders who have self-interest from making the maps. 2, have party balance of 5 Republican, 5 Democrat, 5 independent citizens of Ohio making the map. And everything that they do requires at least 2 votes of each of those party affiliations, and a total of 9 total. So you can make it up in a couple different ways. And 3, full transparency. The reason why we did this report is because we do reports on redistricting all the time, but we want people to see how our communities are already sliced and diced. And the only reason our districts look the way they do is so that certain politicians can win all the time. And so that's why we did that report that you're talking about.
There was an article that was published in one of the Ohio papers in the last couple of days that showed an example of one of the gerrymandered districts, and literally a house on a street was part of one district and everybody else on that street was part of another district. It's to that level of pulling out votes into different districts to make it acceptable for those folks. Let me also just add in, when you mentioned that there were previous statewide ballots to get rid of gerrymandering and Ohioans overwhelmingly voted for those. That's true. And now one of the commercials against issue 1 says, we've already taken care of this. Well, I think people need to hear that the big part of this, the difference is, yeah, we've voted against gerrymandering in the past, but now we are actually creating a fair process to keep from having gerrymandered districts.
And let me be clear. Our ballot initiative, the League's ballot initiative in 1981 failed. It was endorsed by the Republicans, opposed by the Democrats. Our initiative in 2005 and 2012 failed. We decided to work with the legislature in 2015 and 2018, which are the standards. We endorsed those. We didn't think they were perfect. We endorsed those because we wanted to bring reform to the people of Ohio. Our hope was, because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party endorsed, the better angels would prevail in the mapping process. And that did not happen. The commission, has 4 legislative members on it. The legislature created the standards and the process that we have today, that the voters voted on in 2015 and 2018. They ignored those standards. The other thing the legislature did within those ballot initiatives, within those amendments, it named the Ohio Supreme Court the authority that would judge maps for fairness. And then they ignored that 7 times.
Right.
The point is that we tried to play ball with the politicians in 2015 and 2018, but they proved that they won't even abide by the standards they wrote. So they have to be taken out of the equation. And that's why we ask for a yes on 1.
How do you, after, let's say it does pass, that it changes, what's the game plan on monitoring the success of it over years to come? Is it the same monitoring you've been doing so far, looking backwards, or is it some modifications on, proving like this is working? Look at this. How do you go about doing that?
Well, this is one of the fun things about League, is that we are the watchdogs. So we've been in the room every time maps have been made, not made. We've been in the hearings where maps have been adopted. They've always been made behind closed doors, but we'll be in the room again. We have right now about 150 volunteers who are teaching folks about citizens, not politicians, through a volunteer speakers bureau. What we will do, that speakers bureau existed actually during the mapping process in 2021. We will then teach these people about the implementation process so that they can go out to church groups and Rotary clubs and civic organizations and wherever they can, and teach people about the implementation so that they can participate. So step 1 will be encouraging folks from all over the state to apply. And so there will be so many folks who can apply. Well, it can't be politicians and party leaders or their spouses or lobbyists. It can be firefighters and teachers and retired professors and senior citizens and college students from all over the state. So first step will be explaining who's eligible and encouraging them to apply. Then we will watch the selection process. The entire selection process will be done in public view. We'll watch that. If there's anything that's not working well there, we will go to the media. We will be the voice of the people on that. Next, the commission is supposed to listen to people in terms of how they want the maps to look. And so we will teach people how to use free mapping software to create their own district plans or their own communities of interest and submit them. We will teach people how to testify. We will teach people how to analyze proposed maps and make comments. Maybe they'll say, we don't think Grandview and Upper Arlington should be split. Or we don't think Trotwood and Dayton should be split. We think all of Massillon should be kept whole. These are the kinds of things. We'll teach them how to give very valuable feedback to the commission that will then be used to draw those final district plans. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to start immediately because we have to make this commission and make the maps all next year in 2025 so that we have fair district lines before the 2026 election cycle. But here's what I got to tell you. The reason why they took so long the last time is because they were trying so hard, looking house by house by house, determining how people vote so that they could make sure that they and their friends could win over and over again. It's actually not nearly as hard when you're just trying to make fair maps.
Right. And I asked that question just so there is it's not a set it and forget it. It's that, moving forward, we're going to prove to you this was a better way to go. May not be perfect again, but it's a better way to go. There's nothing perfect in this world. Nothing. It's just a better way to do it. Yeah.
Well, and in that, like one of the most common questions we get, which I think is a reasonable one, is why can't computers just do this? And here's the reality. There's a couple things. One is a computer doesn't know the difference between how different Grandview is from Delaware County than it is similar to Upper Arlington. So there's some of that. But there's also the fact that who runs the computer? Who makes the algorithm? Right?
Right.
And so you're right, there's no perfect system. And that's why taking out the self-interest by banning politicians and lobbyists and party leaders is really step one. And that's why we're really excited. And that's why we're asking everyone to not get duped by the rhetoric and to vote yes.
Yeah. And don't get duped by the language on your ballot.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the questions that we get sometimes is, well, I read that language on the ballot and that sounds terrible. It does sound terrible. The good news is that has nothing to do with the amendment.
Right.
Let's talk about who drafted this. And I was honored to be kind of on the forefront working with Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor on this, who's former Republican Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. No woman has served in Ohio office longer than her. Mm-hmm. Her conservative credentials are truly there. But she also brought in Yvette McGee Brown, who's a Democrat who was formerly on the Supreme Court. She listened to experts at various Ohio-based universities. It's been endorsed by, teachers unions, nurses unions, the steelworkers, NAACP, the Ohio Council of Churches, which includes everything from Baptists to Presbyterians and Lutherans. It's been endorsed by wide ranges of faiths, the Libertarian Party, so many others. And this is why we encourage you to not only vote yes on issue 1, but to check in with your loved ones to make sure they are too.
Switching subjects, and this is going to be one of our final questions, but it's important to talk about dark money. Yeah, it's become an enormous issue. Whether we understand it, how did it become? But it is a thing now. We see millions of dollars of spent on TV and social media advertising. Thank goodness I tap out. I don't even watch TV now when it comes to this, but it still sneaks in. How do we get this negative genie back in the bottle? I mean, again, that voter power. How do we get this stopped?
Yep. So first off, the League is, of course, opposed to dark money. And the first thing that we would love is if every voter could follow the money. If when that ad was on the screen, it would tell us not what shadowy PAC funded it, but who their funders are, right? So thinking about, if it's a prescription drug ballot amendment and you can see, oh, wait, it's supposed to reduce, prices, but big pharma is behind it. Things like that. If we can follow the money, then that should help us be more informed voters. A lot of this started with Citizens United, and which was, a federal Supreme Court case that said corporations are people and that money is free speech. But one of the things in there was not only did they open that up for corporations to give basically unlimited amounts of money, they called on states to increase their transparency. And Ohio didn't change their transparency at all. And I can tell you, my dear friend, Catherine Tercer at Common Cause, predecessors at the league and myself have all gone to the Secretary of State and to the legislature begging for more transparency in this process. I believe that we need to have a more responsive state legislature by ending gerrymandering through a yes on one before we can really handle campaign finance violations and campaign dark money. I would expect when we win in Citizens Not Politicians that we could get some really bad legislation or extreme legislation, I guess I should say extreme legislation, out of the General Assembly. But then after that, we're going to have a more fair General Assembly. It's going to lean more Republican, but they're not going to have this unearned supermajority where they can override a veto from the governor, right? And they're going to have to play to voters. And I think this will allow us to really start to promote some very common sense policy solutions on things like campaign finance or elections operations, but also maybe education or social policies, healthcare. Because I can tell you, back when we used to have swing districts in the Ohio State House, the smartest lawmakers were the ones in those districts because they had to find the sweet spot where they had to find that compromise for those difficult policies. If we have more of those folks, we will get smarter policies out of the State House, I believe.
And again, going back to some earlier comments we made, if we actually have a legislature that is truly working for everybody, therefore compromising and coming up with sensible legislation, people will be more engaged, more willing to be supportive of the legislature and be willing to continue to be involved and voting. I mean, it's going to make things better, not worse, if we can get this through. So,
yeah,
phenomenal.
Well, let me jump in there really quickly. So, research has shown that gerrymandering, again, politicians being able to rig lines so they win over and over again, it certainly makes policymaking less responsive.
Right.
It makes lawmakers less responsive because, again, they have to play to their party extremes in the primary and their big pocketed donors. But it also decreases voter satisfaction and voter participation. Yeah. And so you are right that by ending gerrymandering, we actually improve several aspects of our electoral system at once. And that's what we're really excited about.
It also reduces the amount of things that actually happen. I mean, they are saying that this legislature and the last legislature had the least amount of true policymaking happen because they were out on their limbs doing the extremes, and somehow it would all fall apart. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us. We always ask our guests for their last words of wisdom. If you have some resources you want to make sure that our listeners know about, we want them to have a great voting experience. Let's tell them how to make it a good example.
Yeah, so elections are stressful. We're in this incredibly tense time of partisan divide. And I would absolutely argue that both dark money and gerrymandering are part of that. It can feel like you just want to bury your head in the sand, but that's not the answer. Democracy is a participatory sport. The answer is become a poll worker, check on your loved ones and make sure that they have what they need to vote. Do your research. And so vote411.org is our nonpartisan neutral voter guide. So if you want to learn about issue 1, it has pros and cons in there. It doesn't tell you our opinion. Also, lwvohio.org is a great website full of all kinds of logistical information. The Secretary of State's website, voteohio.gov, is particularly helpful. Any sort of questions, problems, concerns, you can call, text, or Google 866-OUR-VOTE. But at the end of the day, I just want to remind everyone that this is our democracy and this is our Ohio. And the only way that we get to a point where democracy can even be maybe a little bit boring again which is never boring to nerds like me. But at least get to a point where it's less stressful than it is today, is if we're all leaning in. This is our system and we can work it. And we ask everyone to join us and in this nonpartisan movement to make sure that democracy works for everyone.
Well, many thanks to our expert guest, Jen Miller, Executive Director, League of Women Voters Ohio, for joining us today. Listeners, thank you for joining us as well. You're going to find contact information and the resources we discussed in this podcast on our website, lookingforwardourway.com, as well as the show notes as well, too. We're looking forward to hearing your feedback on this and any of our other podcast episodes.